Morning. This is a video to introduce theme 4, and we're going to begin at measures of development, which is listed as 4.3.1, measures of development, as I say. So, to begin then, the objective of this lesson really is to explain to you what economic development is. So I would say economic development, it describes a process whereby the quality of life within a country improves over time. Economic development is quite difficult to measure because there are hundreds of factors that affect the quality of life. So a very simple one might be per capita incomes. The more that people earn, the higher their incomes, the more they consume, the more utility they receive, the higher the material quality of life. Income and wealth inequality will also affect the quality of life within a country. Gender equality, whether there's freedom of speech, there's hundreds of different factors. And that creates a problem in that how do you actually measure something like whether free speech exists or not within a society? And the quality of the environment, you could say, well, that affects the quality of life, but how are you actually going to measure that? Some of it could be subjective. So it's quite difficult to measure economic development because it depends on a lot of different factors, and how we're going to measure each of those factors, and then to make an overall judgment, how are we going to assign weight to each of the variables that affect the quality of life? So it's a minefield. I think in general though, what you need to know is that economic development, it can be created by either material progress or non-material progress. So let's look at material progress first. This describes an improvement in the quality of life made possible by economic growth that's lifted per capita incomes. If per capita incomes go up, as I say, people will be able to consume more, and therefore they'll experience more utility, and things will get better because people will be able to buy more stuff. So for example, when I was 17, not many people had cars, so sixth formers used to walk to school. That meant getting up quite early in the morning. Today, sixth formers can afford second-hand cars. You can buy a fairly decent second-hand car for, well, less than a month's wages for most people. So that improves the quality of life in the sense that sixth formers don't have to wait around at bus stops or have long walks in the rain to get to and from school or college. Non-material progress is improvements in the quality of life that haven't been caused by additional production and consumption that have been made possible by growth. So non-material progress can take place without economic growth having occurred. So if we think about what could cause non-material progress, it might be shorter working hours that mean that people have got more time to spend at leisure, which generates utility directly. Or it might be the pleasure gained from consuming environmental goods like a swim in an unpolluted lake, or admiring cherry tree blossom. Non-material progress can also happen if people have a longer or more healthy life. These things can occur without there being any economic growth. So let's look at the relationship between economic growth and economic development. What I would say is that growth makes development possible. So as we've said a couple of times already, if the economy grows faster than the rate of population, then per capita incomes will go up. Households can use that extra income to buy more goods and services, and that will create extra utility. On top of that, if the economy grows, there'll be more people employed, so there'll be more people paying income tax. The government could choose to spend the tax windfalls created by economic growth on life-enhancing public services such as education and healthcare. So economic growth can make development happen directly through consumption and indirectly through the extra taxes that the government can collect as a consequence of growth, which could be spent on useful public services that improve the quality of life. However, it's really important to understand that economic growth doesn't guarantee economic development. It makes it possible, but it doesn't guarantee it. So why is that? Well, the economy could grow, but there might not be any development because the output mix of the economy could be wrong. For example, we could produce and consume more demerit goods, and rather than adding to the quality of life, we could end up doing the opposite. Remember, demerit goods are goods that are overconsumed because the consumer overestimates the private benefits relative to the private costs. So examples might be gambling. There's been a big increase in online gambling that will, in Britain, over the last 10 years, that will undoubtedly have contributed to UK economic growth. But has that development actually improved the quality of life? Many people would say that online gambling through smartphones is a demerit good. It wrecks lives. I'll leave you to make your own mind up on that. The other thing to remember is that economic growth that beats the rate of population growth will increase GDP per capita, but that's just an average. Again, if output per head has risen, but only a small privileged elite within society gets to consume the extra goods produced, then maybe there hasn't been economic development for the whole nation. Maybe only a small, numerically small group in the population have actually benefited from the economic growth that's taken place. And then finally, we need to think about how economic growth might affect the environment. So as you know, there are negative externalities created by production. So you could have growth, but which will enhance the material standard of living, but that might be at the expense of non-material factors such as clean air or unpolluted drinking water. So let's look at a couple of definitions of economic development. So we'll start off with the World Bank's. According to the World Bank, and this is in quotes, the challenge of development is to improve the quality of life. A better quality of life generally calls for higher incomes, but it involves much more. Better education, higher standards of health and nutrition, less poverty, a cleaner environment, more equality of opportunity, greater individual freedom, and a richer cultural life. And that comes from the World Bank Development Report from 1991. So that just reinforces what I've been trying to say so far, that economic growth can create economic development, but there's a lot more to it than that. And the quality of life depends on hundreds of different factors, that, such as a richer cultural life, which are really difficult to objectively measure. So let's move on again to a second interpretation of economic development, which is Michael Todaro's 3 core values of development. According to Todaro, economic growth can trigger development, but growth and development are not the same thing. And Todaro developed his 3 core values as a broader and deeper definition of what constitutes economic development. So what are his 3 core values? Number 1, sustenance. Economic development occurs when a country can increase the availability and widen the distribution of basic life-sustaining goods, such as food, clean water, housing, heating. If sustenance needs are not met, the population will experience absolute poverty, and that's the type of poverty that's life-threatening. So the first core value of development is making sure that you eliminate absolute poverty by producing enough basic life-sustaining goods. So this is the first core value of development, sustenance. The second core value of development, as outlined by Todaro, is raising levels of living and self-esteem. To raise levels of living, a country will have to increase its per capita incomes. So maybe more people have got a better quality of life because more people have got access to super fast internet, or maybe more people have got access to universities and libraries and such like. Raising self-esteem is also relevant here. This is essentially sort of national pride and creating a feel-good factor. So you could look at China with its maglev trains, or France with its TGVs, and these are emblems of national pride, you could argue. So the last core value is freedom, what Todaro calls freedom from servitude. In economically developed countries, according to Todaro and me, citizens should have the ability to choose how they want to live their life. That's what freedom from servitude means. It basically means, another way of saying it is freedom to choose. Choose what? Well, it might be what religion you want to practice, your sexual preference, whether you want to belong to a trade union or a political party, whether you want to join public demonstrations against the state or not. And you'd say that in an economically developed country, freedom of speech exists. There's a free press. People are allowed to say whatever they want to say. This, of course, is enshrined in the US Constitution. This is what it means. Freedom to offend. This is what Todaro means by freedom from servitude. Freedom to choose and do whatever you want to do, provided that it doesn't physically harm somebody else. So why does freedom from servitude matter? I think in many ways it's, you could look at China. China's made great strides in terms of material progress, but the Chinese Communist Party is, you could argue, is like holding back China's economic development in non-material terms, because there's no freedom from servitude in China, that the people are servile to the Chinese Communist Party. So freedom from servitude, it basically means that people have got the power to influence the big decisions that affect them. So economic development can't happen unless you have a functioning democracy. There's also less corruption. If you have a society where public servants are corrupt and the government serves big corporations that make political donations to those politicians that are currently in office, then you're not going to get the people being represented. You're going to get what you might call corporatocracy, government by big corporations for big corporations. In developed countries, the government serves the people, not big corporations. And also, in economically developed countries, the government is accountable to the electorate for their decisions. So there's actually genuine choice. It's not the case that, you could even argue in Britain, where there's not much of a difference between the main parties, and whatever they do, we just elect the blue team or the red team, and there's not much difference. And if the blue team doesn't do a good job with coronavirus, well, you can vote in the equally incompetent and corrupt red team. No difference. I think another important aspect of freedom from servitude is whether there's fear within the society. So is it possible to detain people without trial? Is it possible for the police to lock people up for saying the wrong thing? for offending somebody? And also, does the state monitor its citizens and invade their privacy? So these are all important aspects of freedom from servitude, which in turn is a very, very important aspect of economic development. So that's it. That's your introduction to what economic development is. So one more time, economic development occurs when the quality of life within a country improves over time, and it can be triggered by material factors, which is often influenced by economic growth, and also by non-material factors. I hope you found that useful.